The Saemal Undong in Korea has universal appeal. It is a UNESCO-designated World Documentary Heritage. Let's take a look at how the Saemal Undong, which started in Korea, became a model for solving rural problems around the world. 1969 was a year of great flood damage in Korea that summer. President Park Chung-hee's train, which was inspecting the damage in the southern part of Korea, stopped at an unexpected place. A small village stream was overflowing beyond the train window, and the villagers came out to help with flood recovery work. President Park was deeply impressed by the sight of them helping themselves without any support from outside. The river is now covered with a paved road, but at that time, thatched roof houses lined both sides of the river. It suffered great damage from the flood, so everyone, young and old, was working on flood recovery work. And President Park went to see it. The appearance of the Shindori village residents reminded President Park of the failed national reconstruction movement 8 years ago. Heaven helps those who help themselves. The government cannot help farmers who do not have such a spirit of self-help. The national reconstruction movement, which sought reform in all aspects of the people's lives, was a nationwide mobilization movement that established a nationwide network based on special laws. However, the results were different from expectations. The National Reconstruction Movement was a government-led mental reform movement that emphasized only the participation of the people rather than special motivation. In the end, it ended in failure due to lack of voluntary participation. At that time, the government was promoting other projects centered on urban areas. First and second 5-year economic development plans. In the 10 years since the GDP quadrupled, the rural issues are gradually forgotten. Because it was centered on industrial growth, we were able to achieve great economic growth in the 1960s. However, the price for this was the serious regional imbalance problem of the urban-rural gap. In the early 1960s, rural income was higher than that of urban workers. However, 10 years later, the income of rural workers had widened to 2/3 of that of urban workers. In the early 1970s, we had to solve the serious urban-rural gap problem. As a result of economic growth, we had capital to support rural areas. When we had the luxury of turning our attention to rural areas, we attempted the project to increase the income of farmers and fishermen. Learning from the failure of the Reconstruction movement, which only emphasized the spiritual aspect, Korean government focused on the economic aspect this time. The Farmer-Fisherman Income Increase Project was a major industrial complex project focusing on the economy. Many agricultural entrepreneurs participated. It was a special industry-centered project that was different from the development of rural areas nationwide. Only a certain size of farming could participate in the major industrial complex project. Therefore, ordinary farmers, most of whom were small-scale farmers, were ignored. The following year, President Park made a third attempt. It was a specific proposal based on the lessons learned from 2 trials and errors. Can a village develop where there is no road for cars to enter the village and people have to carry their luggage on a back from 3 kilometers away? This year, we need to pave roads and build bridges with the power of the residents. This movement is called the Saemal Undong. The Saemal Undong was a plan that combined 2 things: mental reform and economic motivation. We abandoned grandiose slogans and began work on improving the poor rural infrastructure. Korean rural areas 40 years ago. Life, which had just escaped the stigma of being one of the poorest countries in the world, was still like this. Poverty itself. All there was a small house without electricity or running water. It was a small room where 5 to 6 people slept in one room. Since there was no family planning at the time, there were usually 5 to 6 children in a household. It was a time when it was difficult to be self-sufficient in food. Family is the same meaning of mouths that eat foods together. Why did they call their family as mouths that eat foods together? A house was rich if you had one cow. However, the barn was usually next to the kitchen. When life was difficult, the will to improve this environment disappeared. During the off-season, men mostly drank alcohol. A bigger problem than alcohol was gambling. Even though they knew that difficult times would come when spring came, many men gambled with their harvest. Fall 1970. Cement was distributed to 33,000 villages nationwide. The government only provided guidelines, and the residents themselves decided on the specific use.